Go back in there. Hello and welcome. I'm going to pretend that the last 5 minutes didn't happen, and instead we're going to talk again about RCS Zetta sporting events, tips and tricks, questions and answers during a time of remote workflows. So I'm going to head and start from scratch over here. I just want to point out that I do have my nice mask going on as well, because we are here in White Plains, New York at our RCS studios. And because it is sporting events, we do have our sporting colors going on over here. And get a little housekeeping thing out of the way as well. Of course, you can comment here as well as you can email us live at rcsworks.com. Couple housekeeping things. Beta users, that's right. Zetta 5.20.1 is coming out very, very shortly, and we're always looking for beta users. So if that's something that you're interested in, getting the latest and greatest tools, some dark mode, all of that good stuff, always reach out to us. You can reach out to me. You can reach out to Jeff Ziger, who's down below me, who is the senior sales engineer, as well as Brian Willard, who is head of our FTS team, which is the Field Technician Services. And we're more than happy to put you in the right place, right direction, all of that good stuff. And yeah, on top of that, we also have looking for users to send in their remote workflows and their working from home photos. So if you are working from home, broadcasting from home, we would love to see your setup and know what you guys are doing working from home as well. So if you have photos of you working from home, send it to us. You can direct message us. You can comment below, all that good stuff. We'd love to showcase you and you working from home as well. So hopefully you guys can all hear me okay with my quick little switch setup over here. And so let's outline today's video. Here's the idea. We are going to talk about Zetta sporting events tips and tricks. And so we're going to talk about essentially with COVID and sports coming back, we want to make sure that we give you, the best tips and tricks to offer, because the reality is, and I know I said this earlier and I'll say it again like a broken record, how do you know to do something if nobody tells you how to do it? And that's why we're here showcasing our tips and tricks. So as I said, I got Jeff and Brian with me. I'm going to head and have Brian kick it off right now. In case you missed it earlier, don't forget the step one here, outlining this video. Step one is going to be talking about the setup process and talking about, reaching out to your network affiliate, reaching out to your broadcast schedule, making sure you have all the tools and assets ready to go, because that really helps out our FTS team. Also, disclaimer in this video as well, anything you see that we talk about, we're here to help you. We don't want to leave you alone on this island, right? The idea here is that we have RCS support, we have the FTS team, you got Jeff and myself. We're here to help you here. So don't feel like this video you're watching here is going to be essentially, I got to replicate this on my own. Like, how do I do that? No. We're here to help you. So definitely feel free to watch this video over and over again. We'll have it archived and properly labeled for you. And if you do have any questions regarding something, just email, support@rcsworks.com, call in, and you can mention this video or mention a certain, tip in here. We'd be more than happy to help you. So just be aware this is not something that we're essentially saying, here you go on your own. We are here to help you. So one of the things we want to talk about is, obviously with the clock structure and G selector, you can schedule your clocks in there. We'll get to that in just a second. But I want to dive right in here, Brian, and let's talk about essentially network affiliates. We're going to start there first, right? So network affiliates, of course, are those who, are receiving any kind of sporting programs and all of that good stuff. So let's talk first, Brian, about essentially the difference between mini logs and, let's say, audio routing or a second on-air sequencer.
Right. Well, thanks, Nate. First of all, thanks for having us, and thanks for putting it together. And what happened today is exactly a good example of how sports are. The run up to a live sports broadcast, people scrambling around, getting it going, and then what you see on the air is flawless because of all the work behind the scenes. So thank you, Nate. And also what I wanted to, reiterate what you said too, is that our knowledge comes from using this in the field. I come from a sports radio background. I've been on a network head end. I've been at as affiliate. And that's the same with my team. We learn these tips and tricks from using it in the field. And more than anything, as we go out and interface with our customers, we learn from them as well. So you mentioned it. Yes, just because I'm showing it one way don't think you have to set it up that way either. Or if you find a better way, tell us. I always like that we're a partnership with our customers because you guys are using it every day. So what we're going to do is hopefully point you in the right direction. I always make it as like driving a car. I'm going to show you where the wheels at, where the pedals are at, and then you learn your best way. But you have to know. You said it perfectly. If you don't know what to look for, if you don't know what a steering wheel is, if you don't know what satellite mode is or an ETM, how can you even get started? So that's what we hope to accomplish today. So the first thing we want to kind of talk about is heard me mention it. It is satellite mode. When we're talking modes in Zetta, that's sort of how the sequencer is going to progress. Satellite mode will probably eventually get rebranded. I think we're even talking about that to something like network mode. Because as Jeff can attest as an engineer, it used to be everything that came from a network when it came from sports or any syndicated programming came from a satellite receiver. But that's not necessarily the case right now. With the dawn of the internet and the dawn of how high speed with stuff like T1 lines, ISDNs, and now brick links and that, you may be receiving your programming from another source. So I just want to make sure that that's, clear there, that you can use satellite mode even if you're not a satellite receiver. So if you're getting a game, say from locally, and they're sending it to you via, a Switchblade, a Zip, a Comrex, something that is, internet based versus satellite mode is still the way to go, because the function of satellite mode allows us to do basic audio routing for you without having to put a lot of commands. It used to be, when you had a non-satellite mode way back when, you had to dirty up your log and your clocks with a lot of stuff that would say, okay, switch to the satellite source, switch to my game source. And then when they go to break, switch to the local source. So what satellite mode does for you is allows you to set what we call a satellite route and a local route. Get my routes
Brian,
up here.
Yep, and Brian, can you clarify too? So these routes, what are these routes?
Right. It's when I say route, it's an audio source, an audio path, so a route can be any sort of basically, an audio source. So a route doesn't, or a source doesn't have to be from a satellite. It can be from another studio. It can be from, something else. It's just how you're doing switching. And we have a variety of devices that can do routes, so typical old analog broadcast tool switches. It's a router, 8.2 router. Today, with advanced stuff like Axia and WheatNet and Lavo and SAS and all these are just simply, just audio internally, you can route different things. So on our devices, our GPO routes, you see there's a tab, a lot of these have routes feed through. And so we'll create a route, so to speak, as, you're routing one source of audio to your air chain. That's the simplistic definition of it.
I like to think of it as just a good old school patch bay where I'm connecting. Right. Yep. Here's my source. Yep. Here's my destination. Connected to.
Jeff went way old school. I was trying to keep him in the middle there. Satellite. He's talking.
Don't call me senior for nothing.
So, well, and that's a good example. So instead of now as a patch bay for our young guys, is you actually, just like you've seen the old people, they used to have to route telephone calls by taking one, patch to another patch. It was the same with audio routing. If you wanted to say, get your satellite to air, you actually had to have a cable, plug it into one side, plug it there. If you want another route, the guy had to manually plug it in there. Now that is all done through the software. And so in satellite mode, what it allows us to do is, on a station basis, is once we have our routes built, we can assign our audio routing. We can say, here are my available routes for my station. And again, a route can just be any sort of pathway to air, and it can be any sort of device, any audio, any piece of audio, that's a source in your plant. And basically now with big AOIP settings and even analog combined with AOIP, the whole station becomes one big router. So you have routes, from point A to point B. What we then say is we want to designate a satellite route and a local route. What that means is that when I'm in satellite mode, when I take this route live, that's the source that's being routed to air. And it's designated by, in our route panel here, by my little satellite dish. And it's green, that means it's on. So in my settings, and we talk about macros, we'll do that a little more. I said, okay, during this time, I want this as my satellite route, which is like my default, my guy I'm going to go back to. If nothing else is playing or nothing else is happening, that's what I want patched to air. And so that's going to be, my game, in this case, sports, whatever that's coming up. So what will happen in satellite mode is if you go to a spot block, or if you play a legal ID or play something that's going to play local, that's why we say local out of Zetta, it's going to, by just knowing, it's going to mute or so turn off the satellite route and turn on my local route, which is designated here. And then when that stuff is done playing, it knows to return. And that's all through back-end mechanisms of satellite mode. So you don't have to worry about putting in commands in the log. And that's an advantage of using satellite mode to automate games, because you realistically could use our different modes. You could use live assist, you could use manual, you could even use auto and just put pauses and that sort of thing log, but that dirties up the log. And when we start to build something together, the less congestion you can have in a log and the less commands you have to put in there, the less points of failure. So that's why satellite mode, or soon to be network mode, is the first thing that you should do in when you're setting up a station or setting up for to automate a game. So what we'll kind of show there is then the next thing is we kind of need the different pieces. We went through and talked about, macros and configuration and setup. And then what we're going to do here is when we break away, of course, a game is a special event. So it's something that is different than programming, and it's something that's not happening daily. It may not happen weekly. It's not happening at the same time. So this is where something you usually don't build that into your regular day clocks. May it be in G Selector, the station here, or if you aren't using G Selector, if you're just a true sports station, you may not use G Selector. You may just use Zetta clocks. And in both cases, you mentioned it, earlier, Nate, with G Selector and integration, you can use our definition of a mini log, which is something we'll create for sports. You can use that in both an integrated scenario and a non-integrated scenario. Mini logs can also be scheduled from G Selector, and you could also create special clocks in G Selector. Again, there's not a one solution, but what a mini log does, and if I open up one of these, I'll show you a mini log.
And when that's loading up there too, the difference between shows and mini logs, for those who are paying attention, is that mini logs, I should say, has time stamped attributes. So the idea is that if you get a show, you can just have a collection of events. It's all there. But with mini logs, we can add timing elements to the actual mini log structure. That's the key difference between mini logs and shows.
Yep. And spot blocks is another one, and load traffic. So you're right, Nate. And a show is just like a collection of events that you just want to schedule all in once, where the mini log is used for like a break in programming, like a special event program, which is sports. So we can say that too, as a mini log, this is focused on sports, but a mini log could also be used for something else that is, outside of your regular scheduled programming. A special event, a parade or something like that, or a live event. You could use a mini log for that as well.
Can you show Brian? Can you just right click and show them how to insert the control event there? Because I want to make sure that they understand.
So it's just the same. Yep. It's just a mini log is just the same as, a sort of, a log. You right click and it'll have the same things.
And so you can see there. So, yep. Go ahead. Sorry, Brian.
No, I was going to say same thing, Nate. Yep. Exact time markers, all a very similar spot block, a very similar pane to what you would do in the log. Because what this is going to be is it's going to replace or go on top of elements in your current log. So of course, the same sort of constructs that are in the mini log that are in a regular log are available in a mini log. So, and you can kind of see, we'll talk, imaging pieces, a break. This is a baseball game. See, I have it, first pitch, middle inning, just comments broken down on sort of a schedule. So I've inserted a couple. Oh, go ahead, Nate. No.
I was going to say, if you can go back to that mini log for a second. One of the things I like to showcase here with mini logs is understanding that there's that relationship, right, between the program director and the board op. And the reality is that, those board ops are the ones that are monitoring the games, and they are getting usually in this role to get more experience. And so you can make a point that you can really control these mini logs the way you want it to be. So you can see that very white line pregame, break 1, break 2. Those are notes and comments for the board op to follow along. And as we were saying earlier, because obviously rain delays happen, crazy things happen in sports, it's good to identify certain things. So this could be as simple or as complex as you want it to be, but I'm always one of those people where I like to be in control of things. So I like to know exactly what's going on and tell my staff this is what's going on. So when you're looking at this, treat this as a window that you want to essentially take the time to create an actual mini log, a structure that you're going to use through the entire season. So essentially don't just half do it. That's my kind of tip there.
Nate, and to expand on that a bit, I've seen sites that actually will go through and they'll literally put in all the games of the season into mini logs. They'll build them all at the very front end and architect or load up the spots and everything, because they already know who bought in for the season and stuff. You can do all that in advance with the mini logs, and that's a really good practice to be in, is working ahead like that, because you can really work way ahead in the case of a sports season where you know exactly who's playing.
Yeah. Before we forget, by the way, if you do have comments or questions here for Jeff, Brian, or myself, I do have my comment phone section open here. I just want to give a shout out and say hi to Dan, Mustafa for checking in, John Rennell. I'm so sorry. I'm going to butcher this name, Augustinson. It's very small here. I apologize if I butchered that. And David, too. Thanks for checking in. If you guys have questions here, we're going to be live. Feel free to comment below. I can see them right here as well. So, again, Zetta Sports Tips and Tricks. We're talking about mini logs versus sequencers. Go ahead, Brian.
No, I was just going to say, yeah. So the mini log, again, and what Jeff said is, yep, you can insert spots into this too, or anything that you could do a normal log. So this is kind of a shell. And the idea is in a mini log is that you're going to sort of have the same format, or maybe a couple different formats for whatever sport you're handling for that season. For baseball, it's 162. For football, it could be, for the NFL, 16, 19, hockey, 80 plus. So you're going to have, one sort of format for that season. So creating it at the start means that you don't have to put it in or you don't have to manually put all these breaks together every day. It's in one collection of items, and you'll see it's a tab in our library. Mm-hmm. So it's an asset. You can throw it into the log in one piece and it will insert. And I've done a couple here just to show you what they look like in the log. I have a double header today. I have one at noon or 12:10 and one at 7 p.m. tonight. So what I've done is I've created a couple different mini logs because, again, there's a different structure. And this more is how your traffic is going to schedule it. There's a couple basics on how we're going to do mini logs. We're either going to have ETM markers that stretch across hours. And you may notice in the mini log that it says 12:09 a.m. Don't get caught up on that. The way mini logs work is that the first hour of the game is going to be set at midnight. And then there's a separate command that is just part of mini logs. This isn't a normal command that's in logs called an hour marker. That's how I distinguish that this is going to be the second hour of my game. So, of course, this game is going to span over 4 hours with pregame and postgame. So if my traffic log's coming over and they're splitting up saying, okay, here are the spots that are going to be in the first hour of the game. Here are the ones in the second hour. When we do traffic load, we're matching on ETMs with spot blocks. So we need to match on those times. So that's why we would have these hour markers. Now, when you start a mini log, it's at midnight. That's your first hour of the game. When I drag this in, it will adjust based on the hour you put it in. And so if I drag this mini log in, it will adjust all of those. So if it's 4 hour game or 3 hour, you're just going to have hour markers at those breaks.
Think of this. Well, go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead first.
I was going to say, as well as, again, today, a perfect example. If normally my game or show would have started at 10 a.m., but because of rain delay or whatever, we got started at 10:30. I don't have to go back and tweak those times. It's going to automatically set those as I slide that mini log into the main log. And that's kind of the beauty of using the hour marker system that will automatically correct when it actually lands in the log.
The way that I like to describe the mini logs versus the log module is, remember, Zetta has a dynamic real airtime. If you change it by like 1.5 seconds, it's going to change the entire hour by 1.5 seconds. That's the real airtime. When you're in the mini log, what time is it? It's not really a time. So what we do is we operate in minutes and seconds, because wherever we drag this in, it's going to inherit that hour itself. And so when you look at this window, obviously we have to start somewhere, right? We have to start somewhere. So that's why we give it the default time of 12 a.m., or in this case, 12:09. So that's why that hour marker comes into play, because again, it's a way of telling the mini log to the actual log module, there is a difference here. And especially when it comes to the traffic log itself. And just a quick reminder, don't forget, Zetta's traffic works essentially in sequential order. So very simply put, if I have spots 0, 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, Zetta knows to split those two spot blocks up. And then, of course, when we have the hour marker in there, it then knows, ooh, this is 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, and then it's 1, 01, 102, 103, 110, 111, 112.
Exactly. And there's a couple different ways to do it. That's why I've created 2 mini logs, because Zetta is very flexible on traffic loading. And when it comes to sports, the different traffic systems, or even within the same traffic system, there's different ways that you can schedule sports. You can either schedule them as this mini log states, is where we're going to split them across the 4 hours. My second mini log here that I say baseball in a single hour. This has the same amount of breaks. It has the same spot blocks, but what is missing is the ETMs across the hour. So this would load in its entirety into 1 hour into Zetta. And this one without ETMs, you could have ETMs all through midnight, but we also do block-based loading with traffic. So this one would be if you're loading based on block and not on time. And also, if you were on time, you could have all of these breaks, all 30 or so of these breaks could have an ETM in the midnight hour. I'll show you what that looks like. I put that in the 7 p.m. hour here, or 7:10. So all the breaks are scheduled in the 7 p.m. hour, but of course, they're going to go and run across multiple hours. That's the key with ETMs too. And just because this airtime, if it's all in the 7 p.m. hour, some of the other background functionality that we're going to move into here in a second will allow us to stretch this game over those hours. And sometimes this method is a good method to work, even if you stretch across multiple hours, because it doesn't erase the games, or it doesn't erase the current content. So what you're going to do then is, we talked about how satellite mode will set and route the different routes, but there's some other functionality that you would want to do when you're running a game. Because the biggest problem with sports, or the most difficult thing with sports, or just thing you always have to say, is getting into a game is easy. We have a hard time. ETM. It starts at this time. So it's usually that. It's 7:10, 8 p.m. That. So we have either a hard time event or an exact time hard marker to trigger it. But the variable part of sports, and that's the biggest challenge, is getting out at different times. Games last short, long, really long, rain out, rain delays. So what we use, and especially in sports stations, is we have a lot of hard events that may be triggered by ETMs, our hard ETMs, or even our soft ETMs won't trigger something, but act as sort of like a sink, a resync, can dump things out. So say we have our game that's set to last, until, in this case, 1 o'clock or so. But what if it goes long? And what if I have a hard ETM at 1 p.m. to fire a macro that puts me back into, the normal programming? We don't want that, because it'll dump out of our game. So how do we prevent something like that? Because we want those ETMs in there. And we usually want ETMs to function in satellite mode, because if we're a satellite station, we're going to go to normal programming and have those function. There's a very cool setting that you may have seen that's very similar if you're a music station when it comes to executing ETMs in a certain mode. You see, we have our live assist mode. This one's always been there, where we say, okay, do we want soft ETMs? Do we want to fill? Do we want to fill? Do we want to drop? If you need if you need sort of a refresher on ETMs, we won't go into all of them there. In our help guide, there's a great explanation. There's a table, and it's one of the most important things to really have a grasp on if you're doing scheduling, if you're doing any kind of programming work. This gives music, and especially for sports, understanding the different types of ETMs. In sports, you're going to use all four of them more than music. You'll use hards, you'll use softs, you'll use hits, and you'll use resets. So it's really important that you understand what each one can do. And you'll see here, we now have a checkbox that says execute ETM events in satellite mode. So, and resume playback on hard. I always suggest using a hard ETM if you're a satellite station to trigger events, because we can, by simply unchecking this, we can ignore that and not execute something. So in a sports scenario, in a play-by-play, we don't want hard ETMs executing, because if our game goes long, we could have one somewhere that would resync, kick our game out. It could fire a macro. So we'll look at my baseball macro here and show you. I got a lot of macros in there. I got a lot of stations running. And again, this is something we can help you learning all the commands. I always say we're always here to help, but also the help guide is spectacular. And a shout out to Teresa to writes that. She spends a lot of time, and it's very well done. And so if you see here, there's a new execute command too that says sequencer set execute ETM in satellite mode disabled. So you may say, okay, well, that's great. I want to disable, satellite ETM functionality in satellite mode during the game, but do I have to go in and click on the station? No, that command will do it. So it will uncheck this, which means that we won't function soft or hard ETMs, which will trigger items that way. So that's a very good, that's a new command probably that came out last year, which now allows you to run games in satellite mode and not have to worry about going through after the game. It used to be, okay, I have to skip my hard ETM here. I have to skip it here just in case the game goes long. And what that required is a lot of manual intervention to get out of a game. And our idea here is that, especially with baseball, you may not have the manpower to have somebody available at midnight, 2 a.m., 1 p.m., 162 days out of the year. So being able to automate stuff like that is great. And so on my reverse, my AServe auto macro is sort of my end of game. It will turn it back on.
Yeah. And I want to point out too here, one of the things we want to talk about, and I know for time purposes, I want to get to this on-air sequencer as well.
Yeah.
But of course, as you know, if you follow the progression here and talking about remote workflows with Zetta, this is the macro section. We're creating all these macros. We can drag and drop it into the clock structure so it's automatic, or we can drop into Zetta hotkeys for a manual, click. But if I have a hotkey in Zetta, it also means I have a hotkey in Zetta to go. So if you're looking for some board ops to remotely, board op the game, you can also do that by taking essentially these macros here, building them the way you want to, dragging them into your hotkeys in Zetta, and then when you log into Zetta to go, that same board op can control those same macros.
Exactly. And you see, that's my panel here, Nate. It's just a specific one for a lot of my macros that fire all that kind of thing. And that'll move into when we say, firing if you're originator. The one thing I just want to point out here that a lot of people may not know on the affiliate side, and we can get your and Jeff's opinion on anything else about automating from an affiliate standpoint, but scheduling the game, easy. Getting into a game, easy. Getting out of the game, That is the biggest challenge with sports. And so you'll see another command here, sequencer sync to current time. That is an exclusive sort of Zetta command. So what that will do is it will, at the end of my game, when I get my end of game command, closure, GPI, however it comes down, a manual macro, it will look to see at what point we're supposed to be based on the clock and then sync us to that time. It's important though, how does it know what times it's supposed to be in? We need to give it some commands. So if we look late in my log, you'll notice ETM markers, and you'll notice resets that I have in front of my spot blocks. That's how it knows. It looks at the airtime. And that's why it's important, and why we sort of, in the FTS department, instruct sports stations to use resets, softs or hards for their syncs, or for their ETMs, because it adjusts the times. And this is where learning what the ETMs do is an important structure, because a hit doesn't adjust the time.
Yeah.
A reset will. Yeah.
So Brian, just to review very quickly, here's your ETM bullet point. Ready?
Yeah.
Soft syncs. Think of music stations. I want when the element, I don't want to stop the element midway through. I want the element to finish. Then I want to drop everything and then continue on. That's a soft sync. Hard syncs, your news talk stations. At 12:000, I want to fire. I don't care what's playing. Interrupt the element and fire the next element. Now, the difference between resets and hits. Hits more of a guide. I want to know where I am in relation to this time marker. Am I above? Am I below? I just want to know visually. It really doesn't do anything physically. Resets will reset the time so that in the log structure, when Zetta sees that, it's going to see that as essentially as, oh, that's a brand new time. And then as Jeff was saying as Brian was saying, the sync to current time, it's going to look at that and say, okay, well, this is the log on the time, or this is the time on the log because I told it that's the time on the log. And I want to point out too, for that sync to current time, Brian, it goes based on the current, like if let's just say very simple numbers. If it's midnight, right? 12:00. If the next element is set to play at, let's just say 12:05, and it's 12:03, right? I'm right in between those two elements, right? Zetta will consider that as, well, I haven't technically finished the first element, right? Because it's still 12 to 12:05, and I haven't really started the next. It's not 12:05. The time is 12:03. So when you do use a sync to current time, it's going to play and queue up the 12 element, not the 12:05 element. Very important thing to know.
Yep. And it's good to know that, Nate, that's why we use resets, and why it's good to also, I may not have explained it. There is a definition of a hard time in Zetta, where you can right click on an element, a macro or something along those lines, and you can actually give it a hard time. That is not good to use if you're a sports station, or
those need to be used very sparingly,
or a talk station. And it's because they can't be ignored. Right. And it makes sense. I remember having this conversation with Martin Blazek, our product manager at Zetta, one time. Trying to find a way, well, how can we ignore hard times? Why would you want to ignore a hard time? It's a hard time, what we're telling Zetta. So that's why a lot of people probably got in a habit early on in Zetta for news talk and sports stations would set macros with hard times. And we would get into that trouble when you ran sports, because there's no way to ignore that hard time. So you'd have to skip it. That's why using the ETM hard achieves the same goal. It actually achieves more. It syncs to that point. It will fire the macro next. It can act as a sync to current time. It does so much more. And with that setting that we showed you, it can be toggled on and off when we don't want it to go, namely in sports. So if you've set it up before, if you're ever going to run sports, even if you're a news talk or sports station now, I would start using ETM hards more than anything instead of hard time events. That'll help you in the long run.
Yeah, I have to agree. That's enough. It's kind of I don't even think it's specific to sports or news talk. It's an affiliate kind of thing. If you need to be kind of in sync with somebody else, putting in these ETMs those are safety valves. And you put as many safety valves in as you can, because it helps make sure that when you need to apply the safety valve, you will be at the right time in the log.
And hard times cannot be ignored in any mode. So and the best example, even if you don't run sports, what about breaking news?
Right.
If you're a satellite, if I simply switch to manual mode here, because I got to take this live, I need to stop my sequencer. I need to go live and break in. I can then, in manual mode, it will ignore ETM, hards, and softs. It won't trigger those, but it won't ignore a hard time. So if I'm in the middle of my breaking news and my sports macro or my top hour news macro is hard time, it'll kick me off.
Yeah.
So that's why it's much better to use ETM hards to trigger, fixed events, hard time events than hard elements. Now there are places to use hard elements, but that's only if you never have any variable programming. Yeah. And with news talk and sports, it's always variable.
And of course, if you have any questions on when to use the proper execution of hard time versus, all these macros, of course, RCS support, you can call us up. We'll be more than happy to help you, or you can reach out to one of us. You can also direct message us here. And by the way, speaking of direct messaging, I want to give a shout out to Gab and CJ. Thank you for checking in as well. Sorry, RJ. Thank you for checking in. And of course, you can always get your questions in via direct messaging and all that good stuff too. So for time purposes, guys, let's try to jump over. One of the biggest thing we want to talk about in these sessions for the Zetta Sports tips and tricks, the biggest thing we talked about was the addition of having an additional sequencer or additional log module as well. And so, by the way, we can help you this with RCS sales. We can go and give you quotes, all of that good stuff as well. But the idea here is that, of course, we have the mini logs that are hard events we drag into the log structure itself. But as Brian was showing very early on, we also have audio routes as well. And of course, we have flexibility among stations. In this example here, Brian, I want to utilize that cluster. Let's just say we have a couple FMs, we have a couple AMs, we have some news talks, we have some music stations, all of that good stuff. Let's talk about for a second having that additional sequencer to essentially point to different routes.
And this is something that I don't know if I've had to convince Jeff or if we just agreed because we share a brain. But it's the thing about it is, and we've talked about the challenges of sports because it's so unpredictable, and being able to automate things that are unpredictable are hard to do because we have to tell Zetta what to do. It can't think like a human. It's close, but it can't. And it can't the unpredictability of sports, of sometimes starting early, starting late, ending early, ending late, and the dreaded middle rain delay. There is never a good way to automate a rain delay and go back to your regular scheduled programming without somebody doing some manual intervention. And of course, we're stretched thin. COVID radio is stretched thin already. So who wants to be on call 162 times a year for baseball in case there's a rain delay? That's where the idea of adding what we call sort of like a sports sequencer or a second sequencer. And when we say sequencer, that's a log. It's sort of a station. It's a separate station that you can run sports on. Because of an audio routing scenario, Jeff drew a nice diagram here of just with an 8.2 switcher that you can have two sources and two outputs.
Can you zoom in a little bit for that, Brian, for me, for everybody?
Yeah, this is really beneficial too, even more. And I think Jeff probably did it with a switcher because that's the most simple solution. With AOIP, sure. With WheatNet, and with Axie, you can go much more. Go ahead, Jeff. Yeah.
No, you're exactly right. A switcher is nothing more than an audio router tool, but there's a lot of audio routing tool. With AOIP, it's kind of integrated solutions, be it Navigator, be it Pathfinder, whatever, or even house routing systems, SAS. I mean, you name it. There's a lot of options to being able to how to route audio. An 8.2 audio switcher, that's just the old school. It lives in a lot of stations and it can do some wonderful things. And having a dual sequencer, this is the have your cake and eat it too scenario, because now you can have all of your sports programming basically handled by a dedicated machine that you basically switch to for when that's going. If something happens, we switch back to the old one and we continue our programming just as it was running anyway. And it really is a beautiful and probably the easiest way to automate as many conditions as possible without human intervention, or much human intervention.
And to add to that, Jeff, and I'm glad you did it with the 8.2, because there's a lot of customers out there who still have simple setups that don't have big monstrous routers. So you don't need an AOIP or a big router to achieve this. You can do it with some of the basic stuff you have. And you mentioned a second machine, Jeff, but it could even be on the same machine. The sequencer a sequencer doesn't require an individual machine.
I show it on a separate box, more so for understanding's sake, but you're exactly right. There's nothing in Zetta. It's completely modular. We can stack modules wherever you want to put them. So we can put 2 sequencers on one box. We can put a lot of things on one box.
And just to refresh here too, and by the way, hopefully, Cal, thank you for the heads up. This should be better here. And thank you for Steve for checking in as well. So don't forget too, enterprise aspect for Zetta, right? So when we're talking about this example, we're talking about 5 stations, AM, FMs, some news talk, some music stations here. And the idea is that this is all in the Zetta enterprise. So when we add another sequencer, add another log, think of this as an additional station as part of your enterprise. And we'll get to this in a second, but that's very flexible and very powerful of what you can do with that sequencer. We're talking about sporting events right now, but we also talk about different routes, different export sources. When you think about it with your brain of like, oh, I could do this, this, and this with an additional sequencer, sometimes this might be a resolution for your cluster to do a lot of different functionalities, to have that additional sequencer available at different times or different functions. It can be a very powerful tool.
Exactly, Nate. And we alluded that it would be great for rain delays, because in that scenario, of course, if they send it back to regular scheduled programming, you just go back to your regular sequencer log. You don't have anything running in there. Nothing's worried about skip, nothing's skipped. You don't have to manually do anything. You always have something running in the background. The other scenario, which in Jeff's drawing, which is probably even a bigger case or a better thing for today's sports stations, is you can't stream probably 95% plus of major professional and college sports, because they want the streaming rights. Yep. Everybody knows Mark Cuban. That's how he became a billionaire. He brought up all the streaming rights way back when, broadcast.com to sports, and sold to Yahoo for billions. And we now know today that the big professional leagues, and including college sports, that's a revenue source. They want you going to their website to stream it. So you can put it out over the air, but you can't put it on your stream. So up to this point, what would you do in that scenario if you didn't have an alternative source? You just go silent, maybe, and a lot of stations have to do that. That's where the second sequencer would allow you to broadcast the game. You would switch the source on the terrestrial station, and then you could still feed your normally regular scheduled log to your stream, and you wouldn't go silent. And then you can just flip back and forth. As soon as the game's done, it goes right back. You don't have to worry about sync to current time or all that kind of things. Mm-hmm. It can be done both ways, but the advantage, and Nate brought it up great, the advantage of having an additional one sequencer, let alone a couple that you could throw up in the air, and they could be shared among stations too. I think you mentioned that, Nate, that it doesn't have to be just tied to one station. So if you have multiple stations that run sports, if they don't conflict with each other, you could have that sports sequencer for those. And it also gives you that flexibility of alternate programming on your HD2 channels, your HD3s, your streaming. If you want to just run a game on the stream, if you just want to run a local, broadcast on the stream or on the terrestrial, but still on the stream your normal programming, that you can do that all with an additional sequencer. So I think we're all in agreement that the flexibility that we've seen and some of the things that our customers do with it, and this is what a lot of our customers are doing now who are running sports, because the initial just minor upfront cost helps so much down the way with streaming and rain delays and the headaches and the manpower.
And I got to answer Dave's questions here, but Jeff, did you want to comment on that very briefly before we get to Dave's question?
Just on what Brian was saying?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I that's Brian hit all the top points, I think, is just the fact that the flexibility of having that secondary sequencer, it's designated for sports, you could use it for many things. Political events is a great example. If I want to carry a live, coverage of a local election on my terrestrial feed, that's super duper, but I may not have rights necessarily, or want to do that programming to the stream. I may want to feed something else, my normal programming. Just so many applications of this secondary sequencer.
So I want to get to Dave's question here. Dave was mentioning that we mentioned that a rain delay was the example. Do you still need human intervention for that? So one of the things we did talk about briefly was talking about those hotkeys and those automated macros and commands you can utilize. Remember, if you have those macros, those execute commands, you can then drag them to a hotkey. Those hotkeys are available in Zetta to go. Brian, you want to comment a little bit on maybe any kind of possible non-human interaction rain delays? I know you and we talked about this yesterday, and essentially when there is an extensive rain delay, usually they either offer some kind of alternate programming or something. But do you want to comment to any of the as minimum human interaction as we can for a rain delay?
It's more and more common, and this was I think we'll go back to what you mentioned at the start, Nate, that gathering as much of the programming information and technical information from your provider every year is great, because they continue to add items, and changes. And one of the most common things that a lot of networks are adding are rain delay GPIs. So you want to make sure, of course, that your engineer has those wired up or has them plugged in. However, we'll talk that. So this example here is the cleanest and simplest solution for a rain delay. If you have a second sequencer, a GPI comes in and says, okay, we're going to send it back to you, stations, and then we'll send it back to you. Usually if it's a short rain delay, they have it, but if it's a long one, those network guys, they don't want to talk the whole time too. So that would say, okay, it sends a rain delay closure, which will switch a route. It splits right back to your normal sequencer plane. The sports sequencer is just sitting there ready for the game to start. When they send the closure to return, it goes back. Now, there are other scenarios that you can do it without a second sequencer. We can come back and just run a raw satellite. We can get IDs, or we can set up something that just plays a dummy recording. The idea is that you want, in a perfect scenario, to play your regularly scheduled programming in a rain delay. And that's always been a difficult thing to automate because, we're missing the log. We don't want to dump the game. We don't want to dump our mini log out and go back to our regular scheduling, because then we have to put the mini log back. And again, I had that whole thing, the variability of, if we gave Zetta a set time and said this rain delay is going to last 15 minutes, we could pull it off. But if a rain delay, may last 15 minutes and 45 seconds. So, but there are solutions, and this is getting really into, specifics. And so Dave can reach out. If you don't have a second sequencer, there are ways to run programming locally, but it probably wouldn't be the exact sequence of your regularly scheduled programming if you just did the terrestrial mini log, one combination.
Yeah, without human intervention. Without human intervention,
of
you
course,
can absolutely get back to what you normally did. But I think his question was, how do I automate that? And that's where having the double sequencers absolutely makes that so much easier.
And on the manual intervention thing, if you do have board ops too, Zetta is by far, more than any automation I've ever seen, it's the simplest to pull, drag things in, just the mini log. So if you had somebody there, you could shoot it back together within a few seconds, and then when the game comes back that way too. So but the goal is that if you don't have somebody there,
by a Zetta to go as well.
Yeah, so let me just check this one thing, Cal. I want to make sure before we move this on. So Cal was saying, so in concept, I believe that Zetta will not limited to only one additional sports sequencer, right? In a simple word, correct. It should be able to create the sports 2 and sports 3 sequencers as well, in the event of there are more than one games running at the same exact time.
Exactly. And again, it's not tied to every station. So you could have, a sports 1, a sports 2, and sports 3. And we also have some clusters and some customers that are very, very sports heavy. So they may run, multiple games and multiple teams. So sometimes they may have a sports sequencer just dedicated to a team, like in baseball, and then have another one that's a floating one or that. And again, having that variability, you're exactly right. It's a station. And so you could, and mini logs are not just station specific either. So you can have a mini log that can be put in any one of the sports sequencers, as long as you have a pathway to air for that sequencer. Yes, that's great. And so, I would say if you're a heavy sports, the more availability, the better. Yeah.
So I'm going to just quickly, because we got about 10 minutes here, guys, and we can talk about this for forever too. So maybe we'll do a engineering 2 at some point in time as well. So unless those who are watching comment and say that, hey, keep going, I want to keep this kind of another 10 minutes or so, and we have a lot to address. So very, very bullet point scenario here. Using that secondary sequencer. The reason that we love that secondary sequencer is because you can do a lot of things with it, right? So if you have, let's say, the primary and the secondary, in this case, the primary is going to be your traditional terrestrial signal, the FM, the HU, whatever it is. The secondary sequencer is going to be that of, the secondary programming, if you will. So think of this as, it's really flexible what you can do with this. If I'm a music primary, I can do something else in the secondary. So if I want to take that mini log or the audio route on the primary, I can have my music now on the secondary. And if you can go back to Zetta for a second here, Brian, don't forget in Zetta, you can highlight, using the control shift or the, control shift, and you can highlight multiple elements in a log. You can have a show that's pre-configured that's filler rain delay music. You can copy all those and drag and drop it in very, very quickly, very efficiently for a very up-to-the-minute kind of music log, if you will, or just secondary content. Going back to the example of, I know I'm moving fast and I apologize, if you have that 5-station cluster with the AMs and the FMs, going back to what Brian was saying, I'm going to use, for copyright purposes, we're going to say it's a football team 1, it is a baseball team 2, right? So football, baseball. Let's just say you and I both know some brings in more audience than others, right? The variable schedule is all over the place. Let's say on one day you want to have that, that football team. So again, we have the sequencer that is dedicated to the football team. Well, we can route that to the FM on one day, and the next day we can route that to the AM and switch back and forth. So you can start seeing how with the second sequencer, we have a lot of flexibility on what we can do here. I purposely go back and use the words routes in content, because that could be whatever you want it to be. You can flip-flop as many times as you want to. And again, the more sequencers you have, you don't lose the dynamic in your environment. Zetta is an enterprise piece of software. And if you just do a drop down for a station for me, Brian, you can see there that I have all these access. So it would be essentially, here Brian AM, FM, split, Zetta, master VT, or it could be football sequencer, baseball sequencer. And I'm using non-copyrighted terms for a reason, but you get my drift. So guys,
that's exactly right, Nate. Yep.
So hopefully, Cal, I answered your question. Thank you for the thumbs up. Emmett, thank you for checking in. So so I'm going to try to get this really concise here, guys, and I apologize for going a little bit over. Can you very briefly, Brian, just highlight as quick as you can your most important, let's say, tips and tricks for that of a network feed? And then we're going to talk about the conference app after.
Right. And that's what we've kind of been focusing on. If you're receiving the content now as the affiliate, but Zetta is both a system that can be affiliate and the provider. And when we say provider, it doesn't mean that you're hosting, say, the National Football League network to hundreds of affiliates. You're a network if you're out at your local high school just doing your game. And in that scenario, you had a double-edged sword. You had to have staff that may have been controlling it from the site and back and board op. But one of the great things about Zetta is that we've talked about Zetta to go. You can run the game from the location via Zetta to go, or the biggest thing for engineers out there, GPIO. When we say GPIO, any sort of mechanism of sending data to trigger something in Zetta. When I say GPIO or contact closure, Jeff and I immediately think of wiring things up. But today, Zetta can send and receive just ASCII commands or just something, via TCP or UDP, and can send a command. It can be mapped in different ways to trigger everything. Everything in Zetta can be mapped to one of these inputs. So that means you could have a simple 5-button panel or just a laptop or something like that, and you can trigger everything back at the studio. You can run the game, board op yourself. You can worry about a rain delay. You can do it all. I remember I used to, engineer games, and it would be a whole truck full of stuff to try to do something at the location, and maybe 1 or 2 people back at the studio having to actually do the local part of it. This with a laptop and whatever your audio sending device is, that's all you would need to network provide a game. And that goes if you're just doing the local high school basketball game, or if you're doing, the whole big national network for one of the major sporting
flagship
events.
Station, yeah.
Yep, flagship station. And so that's one of the great things I like, and we've seen so many different ways. And just another thing to highlight on the way of, we mentioned on the affiliate and on the network side, is the ability with our shifts to change what different GPIOs do. This is something that I wanted to really, highlight as something to know, is that when you get a GPI to say end a game or to fire something, you don't have to anymore say have 10 different GPIs mapped to 10 different items because, you may be joining a different game or a different show in progress. You can, based on our shifts, you can have different functions, different GPI events do different tasks based on what shift it's on. And this is something
conditional processing.
Right, exactly. And sending as well. So this means that you only need to wire, and not even wire anymore, because we can receive, the just straight net queues off satellite receivers, via TCP. You don't even need to wire anything anymore. And so that's something that is very good for both network and for affiliates, that you can change shifts and change the variability. It's no longer hard coded that this physical wire is always playing a spot block or always playing this liner.
Yeah, in the words of Dave on Facebook, go wires.
Yes. Yeah.
Again, I'm sorry for time purposes here, guys. I'm trying to get this one in here. Dave B was talking about, we love the fact that, thanks for switching over to Zetta. He was talking about the end of game closures, how you can have an ETM failsafe on there in regards to, he said on occasion his board op would forget to send an end of game closure. Could he have some kind of failsafe on there?
Exactly. You can. Yep. Like I said, and that's something where maybe you would use a hard time at that point if we're ignoring the ETMs or something, and that kind of stuff. Or there's all kinds of functionality in that we could trigger something off. You can send, and this is just a unique, and I'll do it really quick. You can send commands from other station logs, including the background recorder, to the other one. So our friend Mike Hutchins at Town Square does a lot of that stuff with background recorders, where he schedules elements in the background recorder log to send to the terrestrial. So in the failsafe, you could have another station, that in the cluster have something in their log that says at midnight or at 11 p.m. or in the background recorder, okay, trigger the end of game macro. So you don't even have to have the end of game macro in your own station log. You could have something, as you keep alluding to, Nate, the enterprise. Another station could have it in their log, or the background recorder could have it in theirs.
Or we could embed it into the mini log at the end of the last spot block. I mean, there's many ways to do this.
Yep. So say there's about 10 different fail safes, Dave. It's just whatever works best for you. Yep.
All right, 2-minute warning here, guys. Hey, it works. Puns work.
Very appropriate.
Is that right? Yeah, that's great. So get your last-minute questions in right now, because I know we went kind of long, but we love these questions, and we're here to help you out as always. So if you do have questions, comment below. Otherwise, you can direct message us or comment afterwards. If you're watching this not live, we'll answer your questions for you too. As always, you can email us live@rcsworks.com. We'll be doing it again next Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern time, as part of our ongoing weekly series, questions and answers during a time of remote workflows. Want to mention very briefly, I've done this in past videos. Don't forget, we have the Revma. That's our content delivery network. We do have the conference app with Revma. It's a very, very cool way to have multiple inputs for one room with a single output as well. So you can have multiple sources. A host can have multiple users access that. So if you have a play-by-play, you can take all of your users into that one room, send it out as an audio route to wherever you want it to go. That's the Revma conference app. If you want other videos in the past, I can point you in the right direction for that. So very briefly, guys. So I'll go with Jeff first here. In your kind of professional opinion, things we talked about today or just things we didn't get to, what's 1 or 2 points that you like to kind of share in regards to tips and tricks with Zetta sporting events?
I really think satellite mode is such a valuable tool in handling source routing. And again, keep in mind it's going to be called network, but it doesn't have to, it could even be your own broadcast from your own local football field. It doesn't really matter where it's coming from. But when you're starting to basically make your station affiliate to your own programming or somebody else's programming, satellite mode offers some incredible functionality so that even if today, if the route comes in via satellite, but tomorrow it's going to come in by Comrex Brick, with satellite mode, I only have to make one change. I say my default satellite source is now the Comrex Brick, not the satellite. The rest of my game functions all by itself. Biggest tip there is satellite mode. It works wonders for sports programming.
Cool. Brian?
I think it's rare these days that my team come across something that we can't automate with all of the in-depth stuff that Zetta offers. The stuff that you just see on the surface in Zetta, there is so many layers of depth of execute commands and GPIO functionality and what you can do. Please ask. I mean, I always say, yeah, give us a call because there is layers and layers, and we come up with new stuff today. I was, talking with one of my guys, Scott Wells, about how to automate something like, oh yeah, that'll work with a TCP command, map to this execute command, map to this. So we can make that work just, so whatever it is, call us, ask us, there's probably a way to do it. And again, just, I know you talk about it all the time, but the future of what Zetta to Go and Zetta Cloud will do and the conferencing app for sports. I mean, Zetta is the premier, radio software for music. We already know that. But what it really can do for automated sports programming is absolutely amazing. And I've seen it from every level, from an affiliate to network to now doing this job. It's great. That's why I get excited for this. And I have all my sports stuff out. And you have to hurry me up, Nate, and we could have done this for 3 hours. So that was my quick 2 to 10, 15 points to wrap it up for you.
Yeah. Layup game.
Hey,
there's a flag.
It's 2 minutes. It's not 2 minutes. That can last an hour with 14 commercials. So yeah, that's doing that.
The best and worst thing is having a Zetta clock in the top left that I can monitor this entire broadcast. So yes. Hey, Cal, thank you for checking from Malaysia. We really appreciate it. Cheers to Dave B. He was, Dave W, I should say. He was saying, and then that marks beer o'clock in London. So definitely cheers, Dave. Other Dave B. Dave Benson goes, best beer is in Michigan. Can I get an amen, Brian? Okay.
Well, it's still early here. I can't have a beer yet.
We got the rest of the day to work too.
Getting close.
I'm in the office, so. Before I forget too, don't forget the additional on-air sequencer is such a powerful tool. If you have questions, you want quotes on that, reach out to me. Reach out to your local sales representative. We'll get you some numbers on there. It's a really great tool, and as I said, it's a flexible tool for a cluster to move some content around and audio sources around as well. I was going to say something like, G Selector. We didn't get a chance to show it, but in G Selector, don't forget, you have grid overrides. But now, relatively brand new, we have clock overrides as well. If you're a music station with G Selector integrated with Zetta, remember they're 100% integrated. If I have that clock structure in G Selector, and that can include mini logs, by the way, I can essentially do a clock override. That's going to clocks, and then grids, and then overrides, if I'm not mistaken. So clock grids overrides, you can see right there, just hit the plus on there, just as you would for the grid override. The only difference is it's the specific clock itself. And coming down the pipeline too, the next version of G Selector, we are going to have clock structures broken down by the minute. That's right. So if you wanted to have, let's say, an hour and a half clock or a 15-minute clock, we can do that in the next version of G Selector. I will be teasing that shortly in an upcoming Facebook Live event. So last call for comments. Thank you guys so much for commenting and checking in. We love it. We'll have this archive for you as well as other videos as well. Go to rcsworks.com and then go to the blog section in the very top right, or Facebook in the videos. Everything's broken down by product. I will see you next Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And Jeff, Brian, anything else you want to add before we go?
Game on.
There you go. Thank you, Nate. This was great. I know it was a stressful morning, but great job.
Hey, we got there, right? And now I'm going to do this awkward transition here to see if I can't go and close the recording. So thank you, everybody, so much. I'll see you next Thursday.
Bye.
Yep, see? That's we all wave a bye.